Welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because we're going to break down the complex and honestly often misunderstood science of addiction. And we're going to do it together, step by step, on a really clear, structured journey. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the clinical terminology or just the sheer scale of the conversation around substance use, you are exactly in the right place. So let's build a solid foundation of understanding together. So here's a question for you. Where does a habit actually end and an addiction begin? It's a question that really challenges that binary mindset so many of us carry around. You know, this idea of someone being completely normal versus being addicted. The truth is, human behavior rarely fits neatly into those little boxes. Substance use actually exists in this vast gray area, and understanding that gray area, that's the absolute key to real prevention and effective care.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the substance use continuum. Then, how substances affect us, followed by the addiction process. After that, we'll be rethinking relapse, touching on behavioral addictions, and finally, wrapping up with evidence-based prevention.
All right, let's dive right into Section 1, the substance use continuum, and establish a shared vocabulary.
Now I want to pause here for a second to emphasize a pretty counterintuitive fact. Physical dependence, which basically just means your body has adapted to a substance, and tolerance, where you need more of it for the same effect, are not the same thing as addiction. For example, a patient can be perfectly compliant with a prescribed medication and develop physical dependence without having an actual addiction. Addiction is strictly defined by compulsive continuation despite harm. Confusing these terms can seriously harm patient care and just pile on the stigma.
It's so vital to understand that simple use doesn't automatically mean disorder. Moving from complete non-use all the way down to a diagnosed substance use disorder is a gradual progression, but, and this is a big but, even an infrequent event that falls under hazardous use can still be incredibly dangerous. Just one intoxicated drive or one single instance of mixing the wrong substances can literally be fatal, so effective prevention means looking at both that long-term pattern and the immediate hazard. Moving right along to Section 2, how substances affect us. Let's look beyond just the chemical names.
You see, there's a vast ecosystem of factors shaping drug effects. The route of administration changes how fast a drug hits the brain, while developmental timing dictates totally different risks for, say, a teenager versus an older adult. But I really want to emphasize polysubstance use here. Mixing substances, particularly combining central nervous system depressants like opioids, alcohol, or benzodiazepines, creates this dangerously unpredictable interaction. It's not just adding one effect to another. It's a profound risk that can literally stop a person's breathing entirely. There's a great quote that says, "The same dose can be experienced differently because of set and setting." What this means is that a person's internal mood, their biological learning history, and their expectations, when combined with their physical and social environment, completely alter how the brain perceives the substance. A drug's effect is fundamentally shaped by its context. That brings us to Section 3, the addiction process, and the exact mechanics of compulsion.
One of the absolute most vital shifts in the addiction process is how the source of reinforcement changes over time. Positive reinforcement is all about seeking a valued effect, right? Like the euphoria of a substance or that feeling of social belonging at a party. But over time, the brain adapts. And that brings us to negative reinforcement, which simply means removing something awful. A person might start drinking for the social reward, but eventually they're continuing just to relieve the crushing anxiety and physical pain of withdrawal. The entire function of the behavior completely flips.
When we talk about this flip, I want you to imagine a shrinking world. That's exactly what functional narrowing is. It happens when all those other alternative ways to find joy, find relief, or feel capable just start to disappear. The substance, or the behavior, becomes literally the only tool left in the toolbox to celebrate, to connect, or sometimes just to survive the day.
The ecological identity model anchors a really core concept for us here. Addiction does not happen in a vacuum. Where you are, who you are in that space, and what changing your habits would realistically cost you socially, those things matter just as much as the substance itself. Giving up a substance might mean losing your only friend group or your only source of status. The ecological cost of recovery is incredibly high, and we absolutely have to account for that in treatment.
Let's pivot to Section 4, Rethinking Relapse, and looking way beyond moral failure.
Differentiating a lapse from a relapse is so important. A lapse is a brief return to the behavior. A relapse is a sustained return. Why does this distinction matter? because treating a single brief lapse as a total catastrophic failure creates what we call the abstinence violation effect. It's this massive wave of shame that makes the person think, well, I've ruined everything, what's the point? And that shame is exactly what drives them into a full-blown relapse. Accountability is definitely important, but that kind of global shame is incredibly dangerous.
Let's look at the sequence of relapse prevention and see how this builds. It's basically a domino effect. It starts with a tonic vulnerability. Maybe it's chronic stress or poor sleep over a few weeks. Then, boom, a high-risk situation hits, like a huge argument or a sudden environmental cue. If the person is missing an executable coping response in that exact moment, the next domino falls and a lapse occurs. Mapping this out is so empowering because it shows us exactly where we can intervene to stop the chain before that final domino falls.
Now for Section 5, behavioral addictions, taking these concepts beyond just physical substances.
When establishing diagnostic boundaries, it is crucial we don't just pathologize everyday enthusiasm. While gambling disorder is a formal diagnosis featuring unpredictable reinforcement schedules that strongly mirror drug use, things like heavy social media use or shopping require totally different clinical boundaries. Using the word addiction casually for anything we do a little too much dilutes the clinical reality of impaired control and severe functional harm. We really have to follow the evidence here.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, Evidence-Based Prevention and How We Actually Interrupt this Cycle.
When looking at the comprehensive continuum of care, we really need to highlight FDA-approved medications. Utilizing medications like buprenorphine or methadone for opioid use disorder is emphatically not replacing one addiction with another. That is a dangerous, lingering myth. It is a life-saving, evidence-based treatment that stabilizes brain chemistry and allows the person to actually rebuild their life.
And this matters profoundly. Harm reduction and prevention are not opposites. Demanding immediate, complete abstinence as the only acceptable outcome can actually be incredibly dangerous. Harm reduction strategies, like distributing the overdose reversal drug naloxone or providing sterile equipment, keep people alive and connected. You cannot recover if you are not alive. Preserving life keeps future change possible.
I want to conclude this explainer with a provocative thought. True prevention and sustainable recovery are not just about fixing the individual, they're about altering the environment. If a person does the incredibly hard work of recovery but returns to an ecology that punishes them, isolates them, or offers no safe housing or meaning, we have failed them. So I challenge you to look at your own community. Does it support recovery or isolate it? Thanks so much for walking through this explainer with me today.